I am Rio, and this is a story that will leave you in awe. A prisoner with no crime, sentenced to live behind bars, but no chain can restrain freedom. Every time they caught him, he vanished like a ghost. How does he do it? How does he defy the impossible? Uncover the secret of the man who could never be contained. In 1936, in the city of Aomori, Japan, there was a prisoner named Yoshia Shiratori who was unjustly imprisoned. He was forced to confess to a crime he did not commit, and the prosecution was pushing for a death sentence. On top of that, he was beaten and tortured every night by the guards. He had enough and decided to escape. Escaping from Aomori prison was no easy feat, but for someone like him, who had nothing to lose, that didn't matter. One morning, at exactly 5:30 a.m., he made his move. He knew there was a 15-minute window during the guard shift change. He had spent months studying their movements. The moment the guard left, he grabbed a metal wire that he had taken from a fruit basket near a water bucket in the bathroom and started picking the lock. His hands were numb from the cold, but after minutes of trying, he finally managed to open the cell door. But that was just the first step. There were still many more doors he had to get past. He knew he only had a few minutes before the guards returned, so he didn't waste any time. One by one, he unlocked the doors and eventually made it out of the prison building. But that was only halfway to freedom, because even outside the building, there was still a large search perimeter around the prison. If the alarm went off, he would be caught easily. At exactly 5:45 a.m., the guards returned and took a quick look inside his cell. What they saw led them to believe Shiratori was still there, unaware that under the blanket was nothing more than a rotting wooden plank he had pulled from the floor beneath his mattress. He had fooled them completely, and they didn't realize the truth until the next day. Now, for those who watch my videos and know me, you already understand that this isn't the full story. What comes next will blow your mind. So get comfortable and listen carefully to what happened after. Shiratori was caught just 3 days later. He was caught while attempting to steal equipment from a hospital and was sent back to his cell. Due to his escape attempt, this time he was sentenced to life in prison. In other words, he would never see his wife and daughter again. Months of meticulous planning led to just 3 days of freedom, only to end in a life sentence. But Shiratori, known as the prison escape magician, was far from finished. In 1940, 6 years later, during World War II, Shiratori was transferred to Akita prison in the city of Akita. There, the guards treated him even worse than in Aomori prison. Having heard about his previous escape, they sought to discipline him, to make an example of him, ensuring that neither he nor anyone else would dare to attempt an escape again. Beyond the relentless beatings, he was subjected to grueling labor and forced to sleep on the freezing floor without a mattress. He was also placed in solitary confinement for extremely long periods. But this was no ordinary solitary confinement. It was specifically engineered to break him. The cell was extremely small, with a very high ceiling, and the walls were covered with thin copper sheets, making them perfectly smooth and preventing him from leaning on them for rest. Not a single ray of sunlight entered the cell, not even during the day. Its only source of light was a small, distant window. The ceiling was unusually low. This room was specifically designed to imprison escape artists and ensure they couldn't break free. Despite the room being nearly inescapable, the guards took extra precautions. They kept Shiratori's hands cuffed at all times. Amidst his relentless suffering, one guard, who happened to be the chief officer, took pity on him. He never once laid a hand on Shiratori and would check on his condition from time to time. Perhaps that was the only thing that kept Shiratori going, giving him the will to survive in such harsh conditions. Then on the stormy night of June 15th, everything changed. At midnight, one of the guards glanced inside his cell and couldn't believe his eyes. Shiratori had vanished without a trace. He was nowhere to be seen. All that remained were his shackles. How did he escape? The guards had relied on multiple security measures to prevent him from breaking out, the most important of which were the handcuffs. But to Shiratori, handcuffs were mere playthings. He had mastered every possible way to unlock them. They assumed he had used a wire, just like he had in Aomori prison. Perhaps he had found a piece of silicone while being taken out of solitary confinement. or maybe he had managed to secure a small tool. No one was certain. Once he freed himself, he pressed his hands and feet against the walls, which were close enough together, and began climbing. Later, the guards would compare his ability to scale the smooth copper walls to that of a lizard. The first time he reached the window at the top, he realized it was locked and couldn't be opened. But he noticed that the wooden frame surrounding it was rotting. So every night, during the time he knew no one was watching, he would free himself from the cuffs, climb up, loosen the frame a little, then climb back down and put the cuffs back on. After months of doing this, he finally managed to remove the window completely. Yet he didn't escape right away. He patiently waited for a stormy night like this one, where the pounding rain would drown out his footsteps. That was his plan, and it worked flawlessly. He had escaped from prison once again. Now here's what happened next. After 3 months on the run, on the night of September 18th, Chief Prison Guard Kobayashi was at home when a sudden knock echoed through his door. As he opened the door, his eyes widened in disbelief. It was Shiratori. Shiratori was in terrible shape, clearly exhausted and in desperate need of help. Kobayashi welcomed him inside, offered him food, and listened intently as Shiratori recounted his ordeal. "I never opposed imprisonment itself, but I escaped twice to escape the torture," Shiratori admitted. "The guards never showed me any mercy. I'm an innocent man, wrongly accused. Your kindness gave me the courage to come forward and share my plan with you. I want to turn myself in to the police and surrender to the justice system. But I also want to file a case against the prison guards and expose the corruption in Japan's prison system. I will start a campaign to change this injustice and prove my innocence through this lawsuit. That's the only way I can regain my freedom and reunite with my wife and daughter. I can't keep living as a fugitive. This is no life at all." It was a daring plan, an escaped convict voluntarily surrendering to the very system that failed him. But more importantly, the one person who could support his credibility was Kobayashi, the only prison guard who had treated him with kindness. Shiratori felt he was doing the right thing. That's why he went to Kobayashi and shared his plan. A little while later, Shiratori went to the bathroom. Meanwhile, Kobayashi quietly reached for the phone and called the police. Shiratori's trust in him was misplaced, and his plan had failed. The police arrested him and sent him back to prison. It was a devastating betrayal. As the old saying goes, betrayal is the harshest teacher. After this, Shiratori never trusted a prison guard again. As punishment for his second escape, the court extended his life sentence by 3 more years. During the trial, Shiratori pleaded to be transferred to Tokyo prison, where the weather was warmer. He could no longer endure the harsh cold of the northern prisons, and his previous escape attempts had left him physically weakened. But the judge was ruthless. Not only did he deny the request, but he also transferred Shiratori to Abashiri Prison in Hokkaido, the northernmost prison in Japan. No one had ever escaped from Abashiri Prison. Why? Because beyond its walls lay nothing but a frozen hell. At that time, it was the year 1943, and the cold in Abashiri Prison was unbearable. The temperature inside the cells dropped below freezing, and food would turn solid before the prisoners could even eat it. Despite these brutal conditions, Shiratori was thrown into his cell wearing nothing but summer clothes. The cold was so intense that he could barely move, sitting there like a paralyzed man. In a moment of sheer desperation, he lashed out at the guards. Furious, he yelled and confronted them. But they mercilessly beat him down and threw him back onto the freezing floor. Still, his rage fueled him. Struggling to his feet once more, he glared at them and declared, "I promise you, I will escape from this prison again. And trust me, there's nothing you can do to stop me. No one can." Then with a smirk, he added, "You think these handcuffs will stop me? They're useless against me. I know a million ways to free myself. And if I can't break the lock, I'll just break the chain." Right in front of them, with nothing but sheer brute force, he snapped the chain apart. The guards froze, their faces pale with shock. Up until now, they had thought of Shiratori as just an escape artist, a man with clever tricks. But now they saw something terrifying. He wasn't just skilled, he was strong. Yet while this moment was extraordinary, it was also a grave mistake. By revealing his raw power, Shiratori had alerted the guards, who wasted no time in preparing a cell that would be impossible to escape from. His new prison cell was reinforced with solid steel, preventing rust or wear over time. Every opening was sealed, made too small for even the slightest chance of squeezing through. And that wasn't all. This time they shackled his hands behind his back and chained his legs, rendering him completely immobile. But the worst part, the new handcuffs were special. They had no keyhole. There was no way to unlock them. Weighing 20 kilograms, they could only be removed through a specialized procedure requiring two experts 2 full hours to complete. The guards only unshackled him once every few weeks, for bathing. And as if that wasn't enough, the true brutality of winter hadn't even begun. No matter how strong he was, the unrelenting cold and inhumane conditions were designed to break him. To ensure his strength was completely drained, the guards cut his food rations in half. It worked. Shiratori was on the verge of collapse, his body weak, his spirit fading. They humiliated him in every way possible. Every time they gave him food, they would place it by the door, and because the openings were so small, he had to crawl like a dog just to eat. The shackles on his hands and legs prevented him from moving properly, and even sleeping became impossible. Life in Abashiri prison was pure torture. But somehow he survived the brutal winter, and as spring arrived, at least the temperatures became slightly more bearable. Months passed and nothing changed, until one night. A prison clerk was working late when he heard a strange noise from the ceiling. Curious, he went to check on the prisoners. When he reached Shiratori's cell, he was stunned. The bed was neatly folded, the prison clothes were arranged, and the shackles, those same ones that required experts to remove, were lying open beside the bed. But Shiratori was gone. Immediately, the guards sounded the alarms and launched a full-scale search. Despite their efforts, Shiratori had vanished into thin air. How did he pull it off? How did he escape from Abashiri prison, despite the freezing conditions and the extreme security? The plan had actually begun 6 months earlier, at a time when he was at his weakest, constantly shackled, with no strength to fight. The only thing he had was time and patience. Every day the guards would give him food. Even though the portions were small, he would save a little bit every time. He would pretend to be watching the snow through the window, but in reality he was pouring soup on the metal frame of the window and on his shackles. His plan? The salt in the food would cause rust to form, weakening the metal of the shackles and the window frame, making them easier to break over time. After a month, the metal had corroded and was significantly weaker. By the end of spring, he was able to break open the shackles and remove the metal frame from the window. The guards had designed all the openings to be too small for a person to escape, but they didn't know one thing about Shiratori. He had an inhuman level of flexibility. You've probably seen videos of people who seem to have no bones, bending and twisting in impossible ways. Shiratori was one of them. All he needed was to get his head through the window opening. Once that was done, the rest of his body followed as he contorted his bones and squeezed through. Just like that, he became the first person to ever escape from Abashiri prison. It was a brilliant plan, but let's not forget where he was. This was the far north, and as we said before, this place was a winter hell. The guards laughed when they heard he escaped, saying, "This guy is insane. If the cold doesn't kill him, the mountain bears will eat him alive." When the news of his escape spread, the only person who still had hope for Shiratori's survival was his wife. She was worried sick about him, knowing that even if he managed to stay alive in that freezing wilderness, he would never be able to return home to his family. Because the police would definitely keep chasing him, his wife secretly wished that Japan would lose the war. If Japan lost, America would take over the country, the system would collapse, and there would be no time or interest in pursuing her husband. A year later, in August 1945, her wish came true. America took control of Japan, the prison system changed, and some charges were overlooked. Searching for Shiratori was no longer a priority, but the question remained, where was he? Was he still alive? The answer was yes. He was alive, but in complete isolation. This time, he had imprisoned himself. He found an abandoned mine in the mountains of Hokkaido, settled there, and survived. He lived off the fruits he picked from trees and hunted wild rabbits and raccoons. He was skilled at survival. Days passed, but over time, curiosity got the best of him. He had spent 2 years in hiding without talking to or seeing anyone. One day he decided to leave the mountain and head toward the nearest village. The world had changed completely. The streets were filled with English signs. The banners and flags that symbolized the war had disappeared. But the most shocking sight for him was seeing Japanese women holding hands with American soldiers. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. He picked up an old newspaper from the ground and flipped through its pages. He found reports about the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and realized that Japan had surrendered the year before. It was a massive shock. He felt that all the time he had spent in hiding was meaningless. Immediately, he decided to leave his life in the wilderness behind and head south from Abashiri. He walked for 50 days until he reached a city called Sapporo. Hungry and searching for food, he came across a tomato farm. He entered to take some tomatoes, but that was a grave mistake. A farmer saw him, thought he was a thief, and a violent fight broke out between them. During the struggle, a knife was driven into the farmer's stomach, and unfortunately, the man died. There was no time to think. Shiratori had to escape. But this time, there was no escape. He was caught shortly after and sent back to prison. The guards knew he had always escaped by climbing and looking for exits above. To keep him under control, they checked on him every night and supervised him while he bathed. A month passed, winter approached, and he became weaker. He started realizing what was going to happen to him, lost hope, and spent most of his time sleeping. He even stopped responding to the guards and refused to get up when ordered. This continued for a while until one day, the guards lost their patience. Frustrated that he wasn't following orders or even waking up, they stormed into his cell to punish him. But when they lifted his blanket, they found nothing. He had disappeared. It was impossible. How did he escape this time? From the moment he was imprisoned, he had been under 24-hour surveillance. The guards' biggest concern was that he would try to climb again. They knew that all his previous escapes had involved climbing walls and escaping through windows. To ensure he wouldn't attempt anything, they watched him closely. But he had intentionally tricked them by always looking up, as if searching for an escape route. Yet that wasn't his real plan. They knew it was all an act, and that he had planned everything from the start. They were very worried about his escape, so they reinforced the walls and windows but neglected the floor. This made his escape this time the simplest and easiest he had ever attempted. All he had to do was remove the wooden planks from the floor. For someone like Shiratori, this was easy. There was no way he couldn't pry up the wooden floorboards. He used his food plate to dig, and the process took him over a month. He managed to keep his work hidden because the guards never suspected this method. Every night, after digging, he would put the wooden planks back in place. The hole was under his mattress, and he had convinced the guards that he had completely given up. He no longer listened to them, obeyed their orders, or even responded when they checked on him. They would see him lying there, seemingly asleep. But in reality, what was under the blanket was just the wooden floorboards. Now he had escaped prison 4 times, and the cycle of being caught and escaping had become absurd. By 1948, Shiratori was exhausted. He was in his 40s, and escaping was a young man's game. One day, while in the Kotoni district of Sapporo, he sat on a street bench to rest. A police officer sat beside him and lit a cigarette. The officer had no idea who Shiratori was and casually started a conversation with him. Shiratori knew that if the officer recognized him, it would be over. So he tried to keep the conversation normal and avoid raising any suspicion. Then suddenly the officer did something completely unexpected. He took out a pack of cigarettes and offered Shiratori one. Shiratori was shocked. Cigarettes were extremely expensive at the time and considered a luxury in Japan. For someone, especially a police officer, to offer him one was unusual. His entire life he had suffered at the hands of the police. The idea that an officer would offer him something valuable, purely out of kindness, brought tears to his eyes. It also reminded him of Chief Guard Kobayashi, the man who had betrayed him and turned him in when he had trusted him. Now here was another police officer, treating him with respect and kindness, without even knowing who he was. As he smoked, Shiratori couldn't hold back his emotions. He revealed his full name, Yoshi Shiratori. He confessed that he had escaped from Sapporo prison the previous year and had broken out of prison 4 times in his life. A strange sense of relief washed over him, as if a great burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Of course, he was arrested immediately, but this time was different. He had surrendered of his own free will. At that time, The Japanese legal system was undergoing changes, and the High Court in Sapporo took a more sympathetic view of his case. They reviewed his claim that the farmer's death had been an act of self-defense. Here's your revised and polished version of the text with improved flow and clarity. They took into account that despite all his escape attempts, he never harmed any guards and only fled to escape their torture. Even after everything he endured, he never harbored any desire for revenge. At the end of the trial, the High Court overturned his murder conviction, which had originally sentenced him to death. Instead, he received a 20-year prison sentence. This time, they agreed to transfer him to a warmer prison in Tokyo. For the first time, he experienced kindness from the guards. It was a strange feeling. They were still cautious and took precautions to prevent him from escaping, but he no longer had any intention of running. He had never broken out of prison just for the sake of freedom. Every time he had escaped to flee the cruelty of the guards, the unjust death sentence, and the unbearable cold of the north. But now none of those things were present, so there was no reason to escape. He accepted his sentence and remained in prison without causing any trouble. After 14 years in 1961, due to his good behavior, he was granted early release. For the first time in a long time, he was truly free, not a fugitive. He returned to Aomori, the place where it all began, seeking refuge with his daughter, the only family he had left. His extraordinary prison escapes turned him into a legend in Japan. And that concludes our story for today. I hope you found it fascinating. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. This version enhances readability, improves sentence flow, and maintains a natural, engaging tone. Let me know if you'd like any further adjustments.